The glass doors of Halverson Global slid open with a faint whoosh, welcoming another Monday. Everything inside gleamed. The floors, the elevators, the people. A world of polished shoes, silver cufflinks, $1,000 smiles, and in the middle of it all walked Zoe Carter. 22, fresh out of undergrad, top of her class. Eyes wide but spine straight. She wore a navy blue suit that fit just a little too right. Not because it was new, but because she made it work. Her hair was, neatly styled in curls, her ID badge clipped carefully to her lapel. She looked like she belonged, but the room didn't seem to agree. The receptionist didn't look up when she walked in. When Zoe softly said, "Hi, I'm starting my internship today," the woman blinked twice, then looked her up and down. "Oh, you're her. Okay, have a seat. HR will get you." Zoe nodded politely and sat down. Around her, employees passed by with half-glances, some curious, some dismissive. A group of interns on the other side of the lobby whispered behind their coffees. "That's the new one? Yeah, part of the diversity initiative, right? Looks like HR's checking a box again." Zoe heard it. She didn't flinch. She just smiled slightly and straightened her posture. 5 minutes later, a woman in slacks and a tight bun walked over with a clipboard. "Zoe Carter? That's me." "Right. You'll be shadowing the analytics team this week. Don't worry, they'll find something for you to do." Her tone was casual, too casual, like Zoe was a burden no one asked for. She followed the woman past glass offices, through sleek hallways, and into a meeting room where a half-dozen people sat chatting. At the head of the table, a tall man in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, expensive watch, sleeves rolled up just enough to show off the Rolex. Charles Halverson, founder, CEO, billionaire. He didn't stand up when Zoe entered. He didn't greet her. He simply leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning her from head to toe. Then he smirked. "Well, I see HR has delivered our summer intern." The room chuckled. One guy in finance let out a quiet, "That's generous." Zoe forced a smile and walked forward to shake his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Halverson." Charles raised an high eyebrow and shook her hand like it was something he'd never touched before. "Strong grip," he said. "We'll see if the brains match." The laughter came again, not loud, just sharp. Zoe nodded, looking forward to learning from everyone. "Of course," Charles said, turning back to his laptop. "Just try not to break anything." As Zoe was introduced to the team, one thing became clear. No one expected her to be useful. They handed her old reports, made jokes about filing and coffee. No one asked her why she chose finance or what she was good at, or what she saw when she looked at the numbers, because they'd already decided who she was. Young, black, intern, which, in their world, meant one thing: invisible. But Zoe? Zoe saw everything. The missed details in the slide deck, the error in the revenue forecast that no one noticed, the way Charles overused buzzwords to cover for a lack of clarity. She said nothing. She watched, she listened, and every evening when she got home she opened her laptop and ran her own models, better ones, cleaner ones, not because anyone asked her to, but because she knew. They'll see it one day, or they won't. But I'll still be ready. On her second day, she bumped into Charles in the elevator. He looked at her, then down at the coffee she was holding. "Oh, are you here to refill mine?" Zoe blinked. "No, sir, just heading to the strategy meeting." "Really? Well," he said, chuckling to himself, "let's hope it's not a waste of everyone's time." The doors opened. He walked off. She followed behind, quietly, with a laptop full of ideas they didn't think she had. Day 3. Zoe sat quietly at the edge of the conference table, while the analytics team debated over a projected earnings chart that, Zoe could see, was off by at least 2%. No one asked her opinion. In fact, no one even introduced her when she walked into the room. They just kept talking around her, laughing loudly, quoting jargon like currency. She took notes anyway, not for them, for herself, Because she had learned a long time ago, sometimes you take the seat they offer you, until you can build your own table. After the meeting, one of the mid-level managers, Greg, tossed a stack of papers on her desk. "Hey, Zoe, mind printing and binding these by lunch?" Zoe glanced at the stack. It wasn't hers, not even close. "Sure," she said. "Do you want them double-sided?" Greg blinked. "Yeah, I guess, thanks." He didn't say please, no one did. They asked her to fetch coffee, scan receipts, and once yes, order lunch for the entire floor. She did everything, without complaint. But at night, she went home and rewrote their reports, just to prove to herself that she could have done it better, and she did, every single time. On Friday, Charles walked past her desk. He didn't stop, but he did pause just long enough to mutter, "Still here? Thought you would have quit by now." Zoe looked up, locked eyes with him for a full second, then said, "No, sir, I'm just getting started." Charles chuckled. "Right. Well, make sure you don't get in the way." He kept walking and she kept typing. Later that day, she joined a product brainstorm session. The room was full of ideas, most of them cycled. Zoe noticed that the numbers backing a proposed ad campaign didn't match the customer behavior trends. She raised her hand. "Actually, I think the retention rate doesn't align with that ad spend. Based on the Q2 user data." She didn't even get to finish. Charles, who had popped into the meeting midway, laughed. "Cute. Let's stay on track, shall we?" Then someone else said louder, "Let's let the intern do what interns do. Observe." More laughter. Zoe's cheeks burned, but she didn't look down. She looked forward. Not one person in that room spoke up. Not one. Even Maya, the only person who occasionally smiled at her, looked away. Zoe wrote one sentence in her notebook that afternoon. "They don't listen because they don't expect you to know anything. So learn everything." By the second week, she knew the company's back-end system better than half the full-timers. She knew which clients were bleeding money, which accounts were inflated for presentation, which teams lied in reports to make quarterly numbers look better. She knew the whole thing was held together with ego, PowerPoints, and people who didn't expect to be questioned, and they still hadn't asked her what she thought. Perfect. At the elevator, Zoe once overheard Charles talking to another executive. "She's just background diversity, a placeholder. These kids don't have grit. Her resume looked decent, but come on. I've built empires. I can spot who's real." The other man laughed. "Well, it's not like her dad's gonna buy the company." Charles laughed louder. "Yeah, right." Zoe was 2 feet away. She said nothing. She just pressed the elevator button, waited, and got in. Alone. That night she called her dad, FaceTime. He answered from a calm, wood-paneled office. Books behind him. No plaques, just presence. "How's the jungle?" he asked. Zoe smirked. "Still full of snakes." "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, they don't see me yet." "Good," he said. "That means when you move, they won't know what hit them." The air in Halverson Global's 27th floor was always cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the tone. It wasn't that people shouted. It was how they smiled while dismissing you, how they laughed as they excluded you, how they made every sentence feel like it had a footnote you weren't allowed to read. Zoe Carter knew that kind of cold. She'd lived in it before, but this time, she wasn't shrinking, she was watching. By now, most people had stopped pretending. They didn't bother to lower their voices in elevators anymore. They didn't hesitate to make jokes within earshot. She's probably here to check a box. If I had $1 for every unqualified intern, you think she knows how to use Excel or just Google Sheets? They said it with confidence, the kind that only came from being certain no one would challenge them. And no one did. During team meetings, they skipped over her suggestions. Charles once interrupted her mid-sentence to say, "I admire your enthusiasm, Zoe, but let's hear from someone with actual experience." Another time, when she correctly pointed out a flaw in a forecasting model, a senior analyst laughed and replied, "That's sweet, but we'll stick to the grown-up table." Zoe. Didn't argue. She took notes, every insult, every dig. Every moment they exposed who they really were, because one day they would need to remember who she was. One afternoon, while printing documents, she overheard two men from marketing talking near the copy machine. "I heard she doesn't even have a parent in finance." "Yeah, someone said her dad's a teacher or something. Explains the thrift store wardrobe." They laughed. Zoe stood behind the corner, unseen. She adjusted the collar of her blazer, the one she'd bought secondhand, and smiled. If only they knew. But she didn't need them to know. Not yet. Only Maya, the junior analyst, showed her any kindness. One evening, as they stayed late finalizing numbers, Maya leaned in. "Can I ask you something?" Zoe looked up. "Sure. Why are you still here?" Zoe blinked. "What do you mean?" Maya lowered her voice. "They treat you like crap. You're clearly smarter than half the team, and no one even pretends to respect you. So why are you staying?" Zoe looked at the glowing spreadsheet, then at Maya, and said, "Because they think this is the end of my story. But it's just the preface." Maya stared for a moment, then whispered, "Damn, that's a good line." The next morning, Charles passed Zoe in the hallway. He stopped, looked her up and down like always, then asked, "Still figuring out how coffee machines work?" Zoe smiled, calmly. "I already did. Now I'm learning how you work." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Might surprise you what I've picked up." Charles gave a low chuckle. "Careful, Ms. Carter. Ambition can be dangerous when you're not ready to handle power." Zoe didn't blink. "I guess we'll find out who's ready soon enough." At lunch that day, word spread fast. Dominion Equity, a global investment giant, was finalizing a potential partnership with Halverson Global. It would be the biggest deal in the company's history. Everyone buzzed with excitement. Except Zoe. She just waited, because she already knew something they didn't, something no one in that building could have imagined. Back at her desk, Zoe opened her messages. One new text. "Dad, final walkthrough with your team next week. I'll be there." She smiled, typed back, "I'll make sure they're ready." They had no idea that the girl they laughed at, the intern they mocked, the coffee-fetching, diversity pick, was about to become the reason everything changed. The sun was setting behind the skyline when Zoe finally stepped out of the office. The golden light kissed the glass towers around her, casting long reflections on the pavement. She walked calmly, earbuds in, laptop bag over her shoulder. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other tired intern wrapping up a long day. But Zoe was anything but ordinary. She walked 2 blocks down, turned the corner, and entered a quiet, upscale cafe. The kind of place with no menus, soft jazz, and the barista who always remembered your name. She ordered the same thing. Chamomile. No sugar, extra lemon. Then took a seat in the far booth near the back, opened her laptop, and waited. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Incoming FaceTime, Dad." She answered instantly. The screen lit up, and there he was, Randall Carter, dark-skinned, clean-shaven, distinguished, salt and pepper beard, 3-piece suit, even at home. The kind of man who didn't need to say, "I'm powerful." His silence said it for him. "Hey, baby girl," Zoe smiled. "Hey, Dad." He sat in his study, warm lighting, leather-bound books behind him, a large abstract painting hung above the fireplace, not flashy, just undeniably respected. "You good?" he asked, studying her face. Zoe sipped her tea. "Tired, but good. You look like your mama when you lie." Zoe laughed, then exhaled. "They don't see me." Randall raised an eyebrow. "No? They don't even try. And the CEO," she paused. "He thinks I'm a joke." Randall leaned back, thoughtful. "You ready to leave?" Zoe didn't answer right away. Then she said, "No. I want them to see me after." "After what?" he asked. She leaned closer to the screen. "After they find out who you are." Randall chuckled. "I told you not to use my name to get that internship." "You didn't have to," she said. They offered it. You let me earn it. And now I'm letting them bury themselves. She stirred her tea. You, coming next week? Wouldn't miss it. They don't know, do they? She asked. Randall smirked. They will. Zoe closed the laptop gently, took a breath. She didn't feel like getting even. She felt like getting clear. At home, she pulled out a stack of printed slides. They weren't hers. They were Halverson's pitch deck for the Dominion Equity Partnership. She had access because Charles asked her to make copies without looking. But she looked. She looked deep. And what she found: weak analysis, inflated numbers, zero cultural alignment. Dominion wouldn't buy it unless someone gave them a better view. Zoe opened her own deck, clean, precise, transparent, built in silence, crafted with integrity. She titled the file, "What Halverson Forgot to Say, Prepared," by Zoe Carter, and saved it twice. Back at Halverson Global, Charles was still bragging. "I've got Dominion eating out of my hand. These old money firms love me. I speak their language. We close this deal and its bonuses for..." All his assistants laughed on cue. They didn't know that the man behind Dominion wasn't old money. He was earned money. And his daughter was sitting in their office. At the desk they ignored, carrying a legacy they couldn't even recognize. Monday was coming. And with it, Randall Carter. But Zoe, she wasn't nervous, she was ready. Because power isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who watches the longest and moves at the right time. Monday morning, the mood inside Halverson Global was electric. The executive team buzzed like a hive, pressing suits, polished shoes, rehearsed greetings. The Dominion Equity team was scheduled to arrive by 10 a.m. And this was it. The biggest deal in company history. If it closed, Halverson would expand into 3 new continents, raise investor confidence, and solidify its position in the top 10 global firms. Charles Halverson was already celebrating. "Gentlemen," he said, strolling into the boardroom with coffee in one hand and confidence in the other, "by noon today, we'll be in a whole new league." His assistant, Jacob, laughed nervously. "Should I chill the champagne?" Charles smirked. "Chill 2 bottles. These guys love legacy, and I am legacy." On the 28th floor, fresh flowers were delivered. The conference room was cleaned twice. Everyone practiced saying, "Welcome, Mr. Carter," with a perfectly balanced tone, respectful but not desperate. No one even asked who Randall Carter really was. They just assumed old money, probably out of touch, definitely impressed by numbers and charm. Meanwhile, Zoe sat quietly at her usual desk. No one paid her any attention. No one asked if she wanted to be in the room. No one asked what she knew, and that's exactly how she wanted it. She closed her laptop, slid her custom presentation folder into her bag, and sipped her tea. At 9:57 a.m., the elevator dinged. Shoes clicked. Ties were straightened. All heads turned, and Randall Carter stepped out, not rushed, not smiling, just composed perfectly. A charcoal suit, deep burgundy tie, leather folder in hand. Behind him was a younger woman from Dominion's strategy team. And right behind her was Zoe. No badge, no blazer, just confidence in every step. Charles stepped forward, all teeth and handshakes. "Mr. Carter, welcome to Halverson Global. We're honored." Randall shook his hand lightly. "Thank you, Charles. I've heard quite a lot about you," Charles chuckled. "All good, I hope." Randall didn't answer. He turned to his team. "Let's get started." Inside the boardroom, the tension was dressed in pinstripes. Charts were projected. Numbers were thrown around. Charles was in full pitch mode, animated, loud, selling hard. "What makes Halverson special is our leadership vision, our top-tier analytics, our aggressive expansion strategy. We don't just follow the market, we shape it." Zoe sat at the far end of the table, silent, taking notes, watching. At one point, Charles gestured to the whiteboard. "As you can see, our forecast aligns perfectly with your growth sectors." Randall raised an eyebrow. "May I ask who built these models?" Charles puffed his chest. Our best analysts. And of course I review everything personally. Randall nodded. Interesting. Then he turned, looked directly at Zoe, and said, Zoe, would you like to offer your perspective? The room stiffened. Heads turned. Charles blinked, confused. I'm sorry, Zoe. She's an intern, he added quickly, almost laughing. A bright one, sure, but this is high-level strategy. Randall didn't smile. Zoe Carter is more than qualified. Zoe stood slowly, opened her folder, and stepped to the front. She clicked her presentation onto the screen, black background, white text, sharp transitions, title, Dominion X Halverson, Risks, Realities, and Rewrites. Gasps echoed. Zoe spoke clearly. Good morning. While Mr. Halverson's presentation focused on projected optimism, my analysis uncovered three major gaps in alignment: financial integrity, cultural synergy, and post-acquisition transparency. She clicked, slide after slide, numbers, charts, trends. Every flaw in Halverson's forecast laid bare, presented not with malice, but with mastery. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Charles's face was pale. You did all of this? He asked. Zoe nodded. In the evenings after work. Because I wanted to make sure Dominion had all the facts before making a decision. Charles looked to Randall, scrambling. You didn't tell me she was… Randall cut in. My daughter? No, I didn't. Because she didn't want me to. She wanted to earn her place, and she did. Dead. Silence. Zoe turned to Charles. You said I wouldn't last a week. But here I am. Helping your biggest opportunity. Walk out the door. Randall stood, closed his folder. We'll be in touch. And Charles, next time, don't underestimate someone who walks in quietly. And just like that, they left the room, leaving behind a man who had spent 2 weeks laughing and now had nothing left to say. The door closed behind Randall and Zoe with a soft click, but the sound echoed in the boardroom like a slammed verdict. No one spoke. Charles Halverson stood frozen near the whiteboard, a once confident CEO now visibly shaken. His assistant, Jacob, looked down at the table. Greg from marketing fidgeted with his pen. Everyone else avoided eye contact, because everyone knew what had just happened. The intern they had laughed at just walked out of the room holding all the power. Outside, Zoe and Randall entered a smaller meeting room Dominion had reserved. It was quiet, private. Zoe set down her folder and sat. Randall looked at her for a moment, then said, You didn't just prove a point in there. You exposed a company's foundation, with grace. Zoe smiled faintly. They made it easy. They were too busy watching my skin to see my mind. Randall exhaled. It's poetic. They wanted legacy money, but couldn't recognize it when it walked through the front door. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, Charles finally broke the silence. That was unexpected. Greg cleared his throat. Sir, with all due respect, what do we do now? Charles turned sharply. What we do is damage, control. We call Dominion, we clarify the data, spin it if we have to. Jacob spoke up hesitantly. Sir, I don't think they're coming back. I mean, Zoe Carter? Randall Carter's daughter? That man's worth billions. He's on every top 10 list. They said she earned her spot. He didn't even pull strings. Charles ran a hand through his hair. He looked like a man who just realized the game he was playing was already over. Across town, news was already trickling into the industry grapevine. 1 tweet, then 2. Heard Zoe Carter, daughter of Randall Carter, just dismantled Halverson's pitch like a pro. No mercy. When you underestimate the intern and lose the biggest deal of the year, it spread like wildfire. The story was too ironic, too perfectly just. By the next morning, LinkedIn posts were flying. Let's hear it for quiet excellence. Zoe Carter, remember the name. Halverson Global needs a cultural reset. Zoe's inbox, flooded, offers, apologies, invitations. She didn't respond to most, but one email, from Maya, caught her eye. Subject, you didn't just win, you changed everything. Message, I've been scared to speak up for years, but you did it. You didn't shout, you didn't rage, you showed up, and now I'm ready to do the same. Zoe smiled, then, hit reply, good, let's build something better. At Halverson, Charles sat alone in his office. The skyline behind him no longer felt like victory. It felt like glass, fragile, exposed, transparent. The board had called. They weren't pleased, and the whispers had begun. Maybe it's time for new leadership. Charles is too out of touch. We can't afford another miss like this. He thought back to the moment he first saw Zoe, how he had chuckled to himself and thought, she won't last a week. Now, she would be in every industry headline for a month. Later that afternoon, Zoe received a call from her dad. You made waves, she laughed. I wasn't trying to make waves. I just didn't want to drown, Randall's voice softened. You didn't just swim. You taught them how shallow they've been all along. That night, Zoe walked past Halverson's building one last time. She paused, looked up at the glowing logo above the glass doors, then pulled out a pen and scribbled something in her notebook. You didn't need a voice in the room. You became the room. She closed the book and walked away. Charles Halverson stood by the window of his corner office, staring out at a skyline he once believed he owned. He didn't hear the knock, didn't notice the door open, didn't even look up when his assistant Jacob stepped in and said quietly, Sir, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. Charles didn't move. We'll delay it, I need time to prepare. Jacob hesitated. They said it's not optional. Silence. They also asked if you knew Zoe Carter's background. Charles turned slowly. What do you mean background? She's a glorified intern. Jacob swallowed hard, then carefully. She's Randall Carter's daughter. CEO of Dominion Equity, net worth over $6 billion, sat on the Federal Reserve Advisory Board, led over 60 acquisitions across 3 continents. She's not just his daughter, sir. She's his protege. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Charles felt his stomach twist. He remembered the elevator comment. Are you here to refill my coffee? He remembered the chuckles in the hallway, the eye rolls during meetings the day he said she won't last a week. And now, she could end his career with one quote, one article, one tweet. Charles sank into his chair. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Not because someone stole it from him, but because he'd been too blind to see it sitting in the room the entire time. Meanwhile, across town, Zoe and Randall met a journalist from Forbes for a quiet, off-the-record chat. No formal announcement. No viral video. Just an interview about the future of next-gen leadership and finance. Zoe didn't mention Halverson by name. She didn't need to. All she said was, leadership isn't about noise. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you. The next day, Halverson's PR team scrambled. Headlines popped up like wildfire. How an intern silently exposed a Fortune 500 culture problem. Zoe Carter, the future of finance, and what we're still getting wrong. The quiet power of being underestimated. Clients started pulling back. A major investor requested a review of Charles's internal behavior over the last 5 years. The board, now silent, but watching very closely. By Wednesday, Maya came into work and found a note on her desk. Your instincts were right. Inside the folder, Zoe's original analysis. Flawless, transparent, ethical. Maya held it like a blueprint, not just for work, but for how to be. That evening, Charles sat in his office as the sun dipped behind the towers. He replayed the week in his mind, the faces, the phrases, the moments, all of them orbiting around one person, Zoe. And the worst part? She never once raised her voice, never threatened him, never demanded a thing. She just waited. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, picked it up. Charles Halverson. Silence. Then a voice, warm, clear, calm. Randall Carter. You know, Charles, my daughter came to me weeks ago and asked, should I use your name to protect myself? And I told her no. Because if the world didn't see her for who she was, then it didn't deserve to. You proved her right. But more importantly, she proved you wrong. Charles swallowed hard. Look, Randall, I didn't mean... Randall cut him off. Meaning only matters when it comes before the damage. After that, all you have is consequence. Click. The line went dead. Charles sat in the silence. The kind that settles in when the truth finally catches up. And Zoe? She was already back to work. Not at Halverson. She was helping Maya build a new team, one that valued ideas over ego, voiceover, volume, potential over pedigree. At the first team meeting, Zoe stood in front of a group of interns and young professionals from every walk of life. She looked at their faces, their uncertainty, their hope, and she said, "Don't spend your life trying to convince people you belong in their rooms. Build your own." 2 months later, the ballroom at the Global Finance Women's Leadership Summit shimmered with crystal lights and quiet prestige, velvet chairs, name tags with gold borders, champagne flutes never more than half empty. This wasn't a space you simply walked into. You were invited, and tonight, one name was on every whispered lip: Zoe Carter. Her rise had moved fast, too fast for some, but no one could deny her anymore. Not after the Dominion incident, not after the Forbes feature, not after she turned down 3 C-suite offers to start her own firm. From the main stage, a host tapped the mic. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, the woman whose silence taught an industry to listen, Zoe Carter." Applause erupted, and Zoe, she didn't rush up, didn't fake humility, she walked with the same calm she always had. But this time, they all stood for her. She took the mic, looked out at a sea of suits, some hopeful, some envious, all alert, and she began. "When I walked into Halverson Global on my first day, I wasn't afraid of being ignored. I was afraid of proving them right. Because for most of my life, I've been taught that if you're the only one in the room who looks like you, you're probably in the wrong room." Laughter rippled, soft, knowing. She continued, "What they don't tell you is, if you stay long enough, you become the room." Applause again, louder this time. She paused, then leaned in. "Power isn't about titles. It's not about legacy. It's not even about winning. Real power is when you have every reason to scream, but you choose to build instead." She told them the story. Not with bitterness, not with names, just facts. How she sat at the edge of tables, took notes in silence, let them laugh, and how she watched, listened, until it was time to speak. And when I did, they finally heard me, not because I raised my voice, but because they ran out of excuses not to listen. Backstage, Randall Carter watched quietly from a monitor. A proud father, but more than that, an equal now, a colleague. A legacy continued. He turned to one of his advisors and said, "They called me the Lion of Wall Street." "She's not a lion. She's the whole pride." After the speech, journalists swarmed her. "Are you launching your own firm? How did it feel to silence an entire boardroom? What would you say to the next generation of black women in finance?" She answered only one question. A young girl, no more than 16, snuck past the rope line. "Miss Carter, do you think people like me can make it?" Zoe knelt to meet her eye level. "Yes, because people like you are the reason." Stayed in the room. Meanwhile, Halverson Global released a carefully worded press statement. "We continue to support diverse voices and value all perspectives." But behind closed doors, Charles Halverson had been quietly asked to step down. The board called it a retirement. The industry called it what it was: karma. Zoe's firm, Carter & Cobers, opened quietly, without fanfare. But by the end of Q1, she had secured 2 major clients, tripled valuation projections, and built a team that looked like the future. Diverse, hungry, brilliant. No more rooms where she had to prove her presence. Now, she built the rooms and invited others in. At her new office, she placed a single photo on her desk, a snapshot of her on the first day at Halverson, looking uncertain, but already burning. Beneath it, she wrote in permanent marker, "They laughed. I listened. Now I lead." 3 weeks after the summit, the plaque bearing Charles Halverson's name was removed from the corner office. No press release, no farewell lunch, just a silent cleaning crew, a locked door, and a new nameplate being installed. Interim CEO, Lillian Tran, a woman. Young, brilliant, and most importantly, not Charles. The board had voted unanimously, not because of emotion, but because of numbers. After Zoe's presentation, Dominion Equity had pulled out of all future discussions. 2 other partners followed within days. Clients began asking uncomfortable questions. Is your leadership reflective of your values? How are interns treated in your programs? What steps are being taken to ensure equity? Halverson Global, once seen as the future, was now branded a case study in arrogance. Charles stayed silent for a while. He didn't take calls, didn't respond to emails. He watched headlines pass like traffic he couldn't stop. CEO who mocked intern now out as client's exit. When humility costs nothing, but arrogance costs everything. Zoe Carter, how silence became her strategy. His face, once synonymous with power, was now associated with failure. And the irony, he still didn't fully understand why. In a small cafe downtown, Maya scrolled through her feed. She saw Zoe in a panel with 3 other founders, all women of color, speaking about ethical investing. She smiled. Not because she was surprised, but because she saw it coming long before anyone else did. Her phone buzzed. An invite from Zoe. Let's build something better. Your voice matters now more than ever. Maya packed her bag. She was ready. Back at Carter & Co., Zoe sat across from a former Halverson client, a major retail chain CEO, now looking for a new financial partner. He said, "We used to think Halverson was the smartest room. But after what happened, we realized the smartest voice wasn't even at the table." Zoe smiled gently. That voice is now building her own table. They shook hands. Meanwhile, Charles finally gave one interview. Small podcast, low traffic, probably the only outlet that still wanted to hear him. He spoke softly, less bravado, more pause. At one point, the host asked, "If you could say anything to Zoe Carter now, what would it be?" Charles hesitated, then said, "I underestimated her, and I overestimated myself. That's a dangerous combination in any business." Across the city, Zoe never heard the interview. She didn't need to. She had already received the only apology that mattered. The shift in power, not just in title, but in tone, in tables turned, in who finally got to be heard. At a university lecture. Weeks later, Zoe stood in front of a classroom full of students. One of them asked, "What was the moment you felt like you won?" Zoe paused, then answered, "When I walked away from that building and didn't feel the need to look back." Outside the lecture hall, a student named Brian caught up with her. "Ms. Carter, I intern next week at a firm like Halverson. Any advice?" Zoe smiled. "Yes. Take notes. Listen hard. And when they underestimate you, don't argue. Just make sure you're in the room when the truth shows up." And Charles? He now sat in quiet cafes. Less fanfare, more reflection. Once a barista asked for his name for the cup, he said, "Charles." The barista raised an eyebrow. "Wait, are you the guy from that intern story?" Charles looked down. Yes, I am." Justice didn't shout at him. It just followed him, quietly, in every conversation, every room he wasn't invited to, every article he had to scroll past, and most of all, in the echo of a name he once thought didn't matter. Zoe Carter. The sun dipped low behind the skyline as golden light spilled across the rooftop terrace of the New Voices in Finance Gala. It was invitation only. Black tie. The kind of place where billionaires blended in, and no one ever asked, "Do you belong here?" Because if you were here, you did. And tonight, Zoe Carter wasn't just in the room. She was the one being honored. At a corner table, Maya sipped her champagne and smiled. "I still remember the first time you spoke in a meeting." Zoe turned. From the view, laughed softly. "I barely got 3 words out before Charles cut me off. And now?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "Now they're quoting you in textbooks." Zoe looked around, at the lights, the faces, the future, and said quietly, "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came here to make room." Later that night, the host took the stage, a woman in her 60s, dressed in silver silk, spoke into the mic with a voice like velvet. Every once in a while, someone walks into a system not to survive it, but to transform it. She didn't raise her voice, she raised her standards. "Please welcome, founder of Carter & Co., advocate, strategist, and quiet revolution, Zoe Carter." Applause thundered across the rooftop. Zoe walked forward. No nerves, no notes, just clarity. She took the mic and paused for a moment, then smiled. "When I started my internship, I thought the biggest challenge would be proving I belonged. Turns out, the real challenge was not letting their disbelief become my own." The crowd listened, silent, focused. They laughed when I spoke up. They dismissed my work. They mocked my presence. She let that settle, then added, "But what they didn't realize was, every time they told me I didn't belong, they just reminded me I had something they couldn't see. And now," she looked out, not angry, not bitter, just strong. "Now I don't need their table. Because I built mine." Applause. This time it felt like release. Somewhere. In the back, Charles Halverson watched from a monitor. Not as a guest, not even as a critic, just as a man, learning. He leaned back, and for the first time nodded slowly, not in defeat, in understanding. That's what power looks like now. After the event, Zoe stood by the balcony gazing out at the city. A teenage girl approached, awkward, bright-eyed. "Ms. Carter, do you remember me?" Zoe tilted her head, smiling. "Remind me? I sent you a letter last month about being the only black girl in my business class. You replied." Zoe's smile widened. "That was you. You said don't wait for permission to be excellent." Zoe nodded. "Still true. Always true." The girl looked down, then back up. "They don't laugh at me anymore." Zoe gently squeezed her shoulder. "Good. But even if they did, your excellence will outlast their noise." As the night drew to a close, Zoe walked past a framed quote on the wall. It read, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." She stopped, took out her pen, and beneath it wrote, "And now we bloom where we choose. ZC." The next morning, Carter & Co. opened its doors to a new class of interns. No one asked for resumes stamped with privilege. No one was asked to prove why they belonged. They were simply welcomed, heard, guided. Because the last laugh, it didn't belong to Zoe. It belonged to every voice she made room for.